The mountain wind howled through the valley as Emma Martinez stood on the auction block, her hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of shame that pressed down on her shoulders like a stone. The crowd below her was a sea of hard faces, weathered by years of frontier life, their eyes calculating her worth as if she were livestock. What am I bid for this woman? Strong back, good with cooking and mending, though I'll be honest with you men, she's proven barren as salt ground, 5 years married and not so much as a missed monthly. But she's young yet, only 23, and might serve a man well in other ways. Emma's cheeks burned with humiliation as murmurs rippled through the crowd. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the town, where the mountains rose like sleeping giants against the gray skikoi, trying to pretend she was anywhere but here. "Do I hear $20?" the auctioneer called out. A gruff voice from the back shouted, "15! And that's generous for damaged goods." Laughter erupted from several men, and Emma's hands clenched into fists. She had been married to Frank Diaz for 5 years, had cooked his meals, mended his clothes, tended his small farm with devotion. She had prayed every night for a child, had blamed herself for the emptiness that grew larger in their home with each passing month. 15 I have. Do I hear 20? The bidding was lackluster. Most men wanted wives who could give them sons, and Emma's reputation for barrenness had spread through the territory like wildfire. "Going once for $15, the auctioneer called. That was when she heard a voice that cut through the chatter like an axe through wood. Deep, quiet, but carrying clearly across the square. $100. The crowd fell silent. Emma's eyes snapped open and searched the faces below until she found him. He stood apart from the others, a tall man with broad shoulders and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were rough homespun, but clean and well-mended. There was something about him that seemed different from the other men, something in the way he held himself, the way his eyes met hers without the calculating hunger she had seen in the others. "Did you say 100? The auctioneer stammered. "I did." "Well, that's quite generous, Mr. Nathan Edwards." Emma had heard whispers about Nathan Edwards. They called him the Mountain Man, said he lived alone in a cabin high up in the peaks where the snow never fully melted. Some claimed he was half wild, others said he was running from something. "Any other bids?" the auctioneer called out, but his voice lacked conviction. $100 was more money than most of these men saw in a year. "Sold to Nathan Edwards for $100. The gavel came down with a finality that made Emma's knees weak. As the crowd began to disperse, Nathan approached the platform. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and there was something in them that surprised her. Not cruelty or lust, but something that looked almost like kindness. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was quiet, respectful. "I have a wagon waiting. Do you have belongings to collect?" Emma nodded mutely. Frank had allowed her to pack a single trunk and with her few dresses, her mother's Bible, and the quilt her grandmother had made. Nathan helped her down from the platform with a gentleness that caught her off guard. His hand was warm and steady, and he released her the moment her feet touched the ground. The ride up into the mountains was long and silent. The wagon track grew narrower and steeper as they climbed, winding through stands of pine and aspen. Emma had never been this high up before, and despite her fear, she found herself awed by the wild beauty of the landscape. As the sun began to set, they reached a clearing where a log cabin sat nestled against the mountainside. It was larger than she had expected, with a stone chimney from which smoke was already rising and windows that glowed with warm yellow light. Nathan helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk to the cabin door. The interior was simple but comfortable, with rough-hewn furniture that had been crafted with obvious care. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the smell of something cooking filled the air. "You must be hungry," Nathan said. "There's stew on the fire and bread in the oven." "The bedroom is through there," Nathan continued, gesturing toward a doorway at the back of the cabin. "You can settle your things and rest. We can talk tomorrow about arrangements." Emma carried her trunk into the bedroom, which was spartanly furnished with a large bed covered in heavy quilts, a washstand, and a wooden chest. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning she had been Frank's wife. Now she was in a mountain cabin with a man she had never spoken to before today. When she emerged from the bedroom, Nathan had set two bowls on the rough wooden table and was slicing bread. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, keeping her eyes down as he ladled thick venison stew into her bowl. They ate in silence. The stew was rich and flavorful, better than anything Frank had ever provided. Despite her anxiety, Emma found herself eating with genuine appetite. When they finished, Nathan cleared the dishes. He turned to face her, and Emma braced herself for whatever demands he might make. "I know you must have questions," he said quietly, "and fears, but you're safe here. I want you to understand that." Emma looked up at him, searching his face for signs of deception. She found none, only a steady sincerity that made her chest tight. "Why the Brian?" "Why?" she asked. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "I've been alone up here for 8 years. I chose that life, and I've been content with it. But watching you up on that block today, seeing how they talked about you, treated you," he shook his head. "No woman deserves that. No person deserves to be sold like livestock." "But $100, Emma said. "That's more money than most men see in a year." "I have everything I need," Nathan replied simply. "But I couldn't stand by and watch you be sold to someone who might hurt you." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. In 5 years of marriage, Frank had never spoken to her with such consideration. This stranger had shown her more kindness in one evening than her husband had in half a decade. "What do you expect from me?" she asked. Nathan sat down across from her. "I expect nothing from you that you're not willing to give. You can stay here as long as you need to, help around the cabin if you're inclined, but you're not my property, despite what the law might say. You're a guest in my home." Emma stared at him in amazement. "You don't want a wife? Someone to cook and clean and—" She trailed off. "I've been cooking and cleaning for myself for 8 years, Nathan said with a hint of a smile. "As for the rest, that's not something I'd ever demand from any woman." The kindness in his voice was almost more than Emma could bear. She had prepared herself for a life of servitude. Instead, she found herself in a warm cabin with a man who spoke to her as if she were a person worthy of respect. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why would you do this?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, there was something in his voice that sounded like old pain. "Maybe I understand what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control. Maybe I know how it feels to be seen as less than human because you don't fit into the shape society expects." Nathan stood up from the table. "You should rest. It's been a long day. We can talk more tomorrow." Emma watched him bank the fire and blow out the oil lamps. She expected him to follow her into the bedroom. Instead, he pulled a thick blanket from a chest and spread it on the floor near the fireplace. "The bed is yours," he said simply. "I've been sleeping by the fire for years. I prefer it." For the first time in months, Emma felt safe. She did not understand Nathan Edwards or his motivations, but she knew with absolute certainty that he would not hurt her. She woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood and the smell of coffee brewing. Nathan was stirring something in a pot over the fire, his movements economical and practiced. "Morning, Nathan," Nathan said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Emma admitted. They ate together in companionable silence, and Emma marveled at how different this felt from the tense meals she had shared with Frank. After breakfast, Nathan led her outside to show her his mountain homestead. The barn housed 2 milk cows, several chickens, and the draft, horses. A smokehouse stood nearby, filled with cured meat. The garden was impressive, with neat rows of vegetables and herbs. "The growing season is short up here," Nathan explained, "but the soil is rich, and I grow enough to feed myself and trade some with folks down in the valley." Emma knelt to examine the plants, recognizing herbs she had used for cooking and healing. "You have feverfew," she said, "and comfrey. You know about healing plants." "Some," Nathan admitted. "When you live alone this far from town, you learn to doctor yourself." Emma stood and brushed the dirt from her hands. "I know something about healing, too. My grandmother taught me before she died." "That's useful knowledge up here," Nathan said. "The nearest doctor is 2 days' ride down the mountain." They continued the tour, and Emma was impressed by the self-sufficiency of the operation. Nathan had built everything himself, from the cabin to the ingenious system of channels that brought fresh water down from a spring higher up the mountain. How long have you been here? Emma asked. 8 years come October, Nathan replied. What brought you up here? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. I was a soldier, came back from the war and found that the world I'd left behind didn't much want me anymore. People look at you different when you've seen what I've seen, done what I've done. Emma studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. She had heard stories about the men who came back from the war changed, haunted. Do you ever regret it, coming up here, living alone? Nathan turned to look at her, and something in his expression softened. I did what I had to do to survive. But I won't lie and say it hasn't been lonely. A man wasn't meant to live entirely alone. The days that followed fell into a pattern that surprised Emma with its comfortable normalcy. Nathan never asked her to cook or clean. Instead, if he was fine, he simply went about his routine and left space for her to join in if she chose. When she began preparing meals, he thanked her quietly. When she started mending his shirts, he expressed genuine gratitude. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Nathan answered her questions about mountain life and listened with genuine interest when she told him about her grandmother's remedies. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Emma finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. Nathan, she said, setting down her needle, what you said that day about not needing heirs. Did you mean it? Nathan looked up from the piece of wood he was carving. I meant it. But why? Most men want sons to carry on their name. Nathan set down his carving and stared into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. I've seen enough death, Emma. I've killed men, watched friends die, seen whole families wiped out by disease and violence. The idea of bringing a child into all that, of creating someone who would have to endure what I've endured. He shook his head. I can't see the kindness in it. Emma felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. But children bring joy too, love and laughter and hope. They do, Nathan agreed. And if I had met you under different circumstances, if we had chosen each other out of love rather than necessity, maybe I would feel differently. But I won't ask you to bear children just to satisfy some notion of what a marriage should be. Emma stared at him in amazement. No one had ever suggested that her inability to conceive might not be a personal failing. You don't think less of me for it? She asked quietly. Less of you? Nathan's voice was sharp with surprise. Emma, you survived 5 years married to a man who treated you like property. You endured being sold at auction with your head held high. Why in God's name would I think less of you? Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Frank said I was broken. Useless. Nathan's face darkened. Frank Diaz is a fool and a coward. He had a good woman and threw her away because she couldn't do something that half the women in the world struggle with. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Emma's chest tight. No one had ever defended her before. Thank you, she whispered. You don't need to thank me for telling the truth. As the weeks passed, Emma found herself settling into mountain life with surprising ease. She learned to milk the cows and gather eggs, to tend the garden and preserve food for winter. Nathan taught her to identify animal tracks and read weather signs. In return, she shared her grandmother's knowledge of healing plants. The isolation that had seemed so daunting became a blessing. There were no neighbors to judge her, no townspeople to whisper about her failings. She was simply Emma, a woman learning to live in harmony with the mountains. But even in this peaceful refuge, the outside world had a way of intruding. It came in the form of Heirs, a trader who brought supplies up the mountain. Emma was working in the garden when she heard wagon wheels and looked up to see a heavily loaded cart making its way up the track. Nathan emerged from the barn, his expression neutral but alert. Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. Heirs was a thin, wiry man with calculating eyes. He climbed down from his wagon, but his gaze lingered on Emma in a way that made her skin crawl. Nathan, Lewis said, heard you had some company up here these days. News travels fast, Nathan replied evenly. Faster than you might like. Folks down in town are mighty curious about the woman you bought at auction. Emma felt her cheeks burn, but Nathan's expression never changed. Folks in town have always had too much time to worry about other people's business, Nathan said. What brings you up here, Lewis? The trading proceeded with tense politeness. Nathan, examining goods and negotiating prices while Lewis made increasingly pointed comments about Emma's presence. Mighty pretty woman, Lewis said as Nathan counted out payment. Shame about her condition, though I suppose a man living alone up here can't afford to be too particular. Emma saw Nathan's jaw tighten. When he looked up, his expression was perfectly calm, but there was something in his eyes that made Lewis step backward. My wife's condition, Nathan said quietly, is that she's too good for the likes of men who would sell her at auction or buy her like livestock. Lewis's face flushed red, but he was smart enough not to push further. He loaded Nathan's furs into his wagon with jerky movements, clearly angry but unwilling to risk losing a profitable trading relationship. After the wagon disappeared down the mountain track, Emma worried about what Lewis might say when he returned to town. I'm sorry, she said. I know my presence here complicates things for you. Nathan knelt beside her in the garden. You don't complicate anything, Emma. Men like Lewis Harris have always looked for reasons to feel superior to others. But now he'll go back to town and tell everyone that you're living in sin with a woman who can't fulfill her basic purpose. Nathan was quiet for a moment, and when Emma looked at him, she was surprised to see something that might have been amusement in his eyes. Emma, he said gently, do you really think I care what Lewis Harris thinks about how I live my life? I came up here to get away from people who spend their time judging others. Their opinions have no power over me unless I give them that power. Emma stared at him. She had spent so many years caring desperately about what others thought. The idea of simply choosing not to care seemed both impossible and incredibly liberating. I wish I could be like that, she said softly. You can be, Nathan replied. It's a choice, Emma. Not an easy one, but it's always a choice. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Emma found herself thinking about Nathan's words and about the life she was building here in the mountains. For the first time since she was a young girl, she felt like she was becoming the person she was meant to be. Nathan, she said, looking up from the shirt she was mending, what Lewis said today about people talking, does it bother you? Nathan set down the piece of leather he was working on. Emma, my reputation in that town was already beyond repair long before you arrived. I'm the crazy hermit who lives alone in the mountains. Adding a wife to that story probably makes me seem more normal. But a barren wife, a woman who was sold at auction, a woman who survived something that would have broken a weaker person, Nathan corrected firmly. A woman who adapted to a completely new life and made herself indispensable through her own skills and character. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. You are not defined by what Frank Diaz thought of you. You're defined by who you choose to be, by how you treat others, by the strength you show when life tests you. Emma set down her mending and looked into the fire. I feel different here, stronger, more like myself than I've felt in years. The mountains have a way of stripping away everything that doesn't matter, Nathan said. Up here, you can't pretend to be something you are not. You have to be honest about who you are, or you won't survive. Emma nodded, understanding. The mountains demanded authenticity in a way that civilized society did not. Is that why you came up here, she asked, to find out who you really were? Nathan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I came up here to escape who I had become. The war changed me, Emma. I did things, saw things, that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. When I came back, I couldn't find my place in normal society. And did you find your place? I found peace, Nathan said, or something close to it. I learned that I could be useful without being destructive, that I could protect things instead of destroying them. And now, Boyle? Nathan turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Now I'm learning that maybe I don't have to be alone to be at peace. Maybe there's room in this life for partnership. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. Emma felt her heart begin to race as she realized that something fundamental was shifting in their relationship. Nathan, she said softly, I need you to know that I can't give you children. Not just that I haven't been able to, but that I truly can't. Nathan's expression was gentle but firm. Emma, I told you on the first day that I don't need heirs. If we, if this becomes something more than it is, it won't be because I'm hoping you'll change. It will be because you're exactly who I want to share my life with. Emma felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that felt dangerously close to hope. I don't know how to be in a real partnership, she admitted. Frank never wanted my opinions or thoughts. I don't know what it means to be an equal partner. Neither do I, Nathan said with a slight smile. I've been alone for 8 years. We'll have to figure it out together. Emma laughed despite her tears. We're quite a pair, the barren woman and the hermit, trying to figure out how to be together. I can think of worse partnerships, Nathan replied. At least we're both honest about our limitations. Emma looked around the cabin, at the life Nathan had built with his own hands. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming here, the strength she was discovering in herself. I think, she said carefully, that I would like to try to be partners, if you're sure that's what you want. Nathan's smile was slow and warm. I'm sure, Emma. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. When they finally went to bed, Nathan hesitated at the door to his usual sleeping place. I don't want to assume anything, he said quietly. Emma felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. I think that I'm tired of sleeping alone, if you are. For the first time since her wedding night 5 years ago, Emma shared a bed with a man who wanted her for who she was rather than what she could give him. Nathan's touch was gentle and patient, and when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness Emma had never known was possible. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Emma marveled at how different this felt from her experiences with Frank. Emma, Nathan murmured against her hair, I want you to know that this isn't just about loneliness. I'm falling in love with you. Emma's heart swelled. I love you too, she whispered, and knew that it was true. The autumn passed in a blur of preparation for winter and deepening intimacy. Emma and Nathan worked side by side to ready the homestead, their partnership everything Emma had dreamed a marriage could be. As the first snows began to fall, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this mountain sanctuary. 6 months ago, she had been a failure of a wife. Now she was a partner in a thriving homestead, a woman whose skills were valued and appreciated. But their peaceful existence was not destined to last undisturbed. The snow had been falling for 3 days when they heard horses struggling up the mountain track. Emma looked up from her bread, her hands stilling as she met Nathan's eyes across the cabin. Nathan moved to the window and peered out. His expression darkened. Who is it? Emma asked. Frank, Nathan said grimly, and 2 other men. Emma's blood turned to ice. Frank had no legitimate reason to come here, especially not in a blizzard with armed companions. What does he want? She whispered. Nathan was already reaching for his rifle. Nothing good. Get your coat and boots on, Emma. If this goes badly, I want you ready to run. I'm not leaving you, Betta, Emma said firmly. Before Emma could argue further, Frank's voice called out from the yard. Nathan Edwards, come out and let's settle this like men. Nathan moved to the door but didn't open it. State your business, Frank. You know my business. You stole my wife, and I want her back. Emma felt her knees go weak. He can't do that, can he? The sale was legal. Legal doesn't always matter to men like Frank, Nathan said grimly. I've got the sheriff with me, Frank shouted. You're harboring stolen property. Nathan's jaw tightened. 3 men against 1, and they claimed to have the law on their side. The sale was made under false pretenses, Frank called. That makes the original contract void. Emma gasped. Accusation was insulting. But she could see how it might sound to men who didn't know Nathan. Nathan looked at Emma, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. Refusing would make them look guilty. What do you want me to do? Emma asked quietly. Stay behind me and let me handle this, Nathan replied. Whatever happens, don't let them separate us. Nathan opened the door slowly, his rifle held ready. Frank looked older and thinner than Emma remembered. The 2 men with him wore badges and heavy coats. Sheriff Morrison, Nathan said, nodding to the older lawman. Didn't expect to see you up here in this weather. Didn't expect to be here, the sheriff replied. But Mr. Diaz has made some serious accusations. Says you've been holding his wife against her will. His former wife, Nathan corrected. The sale was legal and witnessed. Emma chose to stay here of her own free will. That's what we're here to determine, the sheriff said. Ma'am, could you step forward, please? Emma moved to stand beside Nathan, acutely aware of how the situation must look. Mrs. Diaz, the sheriff said formally, your husband claims you've been held here against your will. Is this true? Emma lifted her chin and looked directly at Frank. My name is Emma Edwards now. I am here by choice, and I have never been mistreated by my husband. Frank's face twisted with rage. She's lying. Look at her, Sheriff. Does she look like a proper wife to you? The deputy shifted uncomfortably. She does look informal, sir. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. I look like a woman who's been working in her own home. There's nothing improper about that. Working? Frank sneered. Everyone in town knows what kind of arrangement you really have up here. Nathan's rifle came up slightly. You'll watch your tongue when you speak about my wife. Your wife? Frank laughed. She can't be your wife. The marriage to me was never properly dissolved. The sheriff held up a hand. That's an interesting point, Mr. Diaz. The sale of a wife doesn't actually dissolve the marriage bond. Legally speaking, Mrs. Diaz is still your wife. Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had never considered the legal implications, had assumed that being sold meant her marriage was ended. That's absurd, Nathan said. The sale was witnessed and recorded. Money changed hands for a woman's services, the sheriff corrected, not for the dissolution of a legal marriage. No, Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. I won't go back to him. Frank stepped forward. You don't have a choice, Emma. You're my wife, and you'll come home where you belong. She belongs here, Nathan said, his voice deadly quiet. With me. According to what law? The deputy asked. Emma could see the trap that Frank had laid. By claiming that Nathan had purchased her for immoral purposes, Frank could reclaim her and have Nathan arrested. There's a simple solution, the sheriff said. Mrs. Diaz comes back to town with us, and we sort out the legalities there. And in the meantime, Nathan asked. In the meantime, she returns to her legal husband's custody. Emma saw Nathan's hands tighten on his rifle and knew that he was considering fighting. The odds were terrible. Nathan, she said quietly, don't. It's not worth dying for. You are, Nathan replied without taking his eyes off the three men. Frank smiled coldly. At least the hermit knows good sense. Emma, get your things. We're leaving. I said I won't go back to you, Emma repeated. You'll go where I tell you to go, Frank snapped. You're my wife. That was when Nathan made his decision. Emma saw it in the way his shoulders straightened. No, Nathan said simply. She won't. The cabin erupted into chaos. Nathan's rifle swung toward the sheriff as the lawmen reached for their guns. Frank dove behind the table as Emma scrambled backward. Gunshots echoed off the log walls. Nathan's first shot took the deputy in the shoulder, spinning him around. The sheriff's return shot splintered the doorframe inches from Nathan's head. Emma screamed as she saw blood bloom across Nathan's shirt. Stop! She cried. Please, just stop. But the men were beyond listening. Frank had found the sheriff's dropped gun and was trying to get a clear shot at Nathan. Nathan worked the bolt on his rifle, but Emma could see that he was favoring his left arm. The sheriff fired again, and Nathan staggered. Emma saw him go down behind the heavy wooden chest, and her heart stopped. Without thinking, she grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the stove and brought it down on Frank's head as he tried to line up a shot. Frank collapsed with a groan, and Emma snatched up his gun with trembling hands. Sheriff Morrison, she called out. Nathan is wounded. This has to stop. Put down the gun, Mrs. Diaz. My name is Emma Edwards, and I won't let you take me back to a man who sold me like livestock. From behind the chest, Nathan's voice was strained. Emma, get to the bedroom. I'm not leaving you. Emma had spent too many years being told what to do. She kept the gun trained on the sheriff while moving toward Nathan's position. Sheriff, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, Frank sold me at auction because I couldn't give him children. He took money for me and walked away. How is that different from divorce? The law doesn't recognize wife selling as a legal dissolution of marriage, the sheriff replied, but his voice lacked conviction. The law also doesn't recognize slavery, Emma shot back, but that's what you're asking me to accept. She had reached Nathan's side and could see that he had taken a bullet in the shoulder. Blood soaked his shirt, but his eyes were alert. "How many bullets do you have left?" he whispered. Emma checked the cylinder. 5, I think. "The sheriff has maybe 2 shots left, and the deputy is out of the fight, but Frank will wake up soon." Ziff. Summoned by Nathan's words, Frank groaned and began to stir. "What do we do?" she whispered. Nathan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was grim. "We make them understand that you're not going anywhere with them, whatever it takes." "Sheriff Morrison," she called out, "I want to make you an offer." "I'm listening." "Let me prove that I'm here by choice. Give me 1 hour to show you how I live, what my life is like here. If after that you still think I'm being held against my will, I'll come with you willingly." Nathan started to protest, but Emma squeezed his uninjured arm. 1 hour, she continued. In exchange, Nathan gets medical attention for his wound, and nobody else gets shot. There was a long silence. Emma could hear the sheriff and deputy conferring in low voices. "What kind of proof are you talking about?" the sheriff finally asked. "Let me cook you a meal. Let me show you the work I do here, the life Nathan and I have built together. Talk to me like a human being instead of property, and decide for yourself whether I'm a prisoner or a partner." Another pause. Then, 1 hour, but the guns stay visible. Emma helped Nathan to his feet, supporting him as they moved toward the center of the cabin. Frank was sitting up now, holding his head and glaring at her. "You hit me," he accused. "You were trying to shoot my husband," Emma replied without apology. The sheriff and deputy emerged from their cover, weapons still drawn but no longer actively threatening. "Deputy, help me get Mr. Edwards to a chair so we can look at that wound," the sheriff ordered. As the deputy reluctantly assisted Nathan, Emma moved to the kitchen area and began assembling ingredients for a meal. Her hands shook as she worked, but she forced herself to focus. This was her chance to show these men who she really was. She prepared venison stew, fresh bread, and coffee, talking as she worked about the herbs she had grown and preserved, the techniques Nathan had taught her, the pride she took in contributing to their household. The sheriff watched her with growing interest. "How long have you been living here, Mrs. Edwards?" the sheriff asked. 6 months, Emma replied, "since the auction." "And in all that time, have you tried to leave? To contact anyone in town?" Emma considered the question carefully. "Where would I go, Sheriff? Frank made it clear that he didn't want me. I have no family left, no money of my own. Nathan offered me safety and respect. Why would I want to leave that?" Frank snorted derisively. "Safety and respect? You're living in sin." Emma turned to face him, and the sheriff was surprised by the strength in her bearing. "Frank, you sold me at auction like livestock. You took money from me and walked away. What part of that suggests you have any claim on my loyalty?" "I'm your husband. That gives me rights." "What rights?" Emma demanded. "The right to humiliate me in public? The right to blame me for something beyond my control? The right to treat me like property?" The sheriff found himself studying the two men with new eyes. Frank was shifty and defensive. Nathan, despite his wound, sat with quiet dignity, his eyes never leaving Emma's face with obvious love and pride. "Mr. Diaz," the sheriff said slowly, "why did you sell your wife if you wanted to keep her?" Frank's face flushed. "I needed the money, and she was useless to me anyway. But that doesn't mean some hermit can just take her." "What purposes would those be?" the deputy asked. Frank gestured wildly. "Look at her! He's been using her like a whore." Nathan's voice cut across the cabin like a blade. "If you say that word about my wife one more time, wounded or not, I'll kill you." The quiet certainty in his voice made everyone freeze. The sheriff looked between Nathan and Emma, noting the protective fury in the man's eyes and the way Emma moved instinctively closer to him. "Mrs. Edwards," the sheriff said carefully, "are you and Mr. Edwards legally married?" Emma and Nathan exchanged glances. They had discussed this, but had never taken steps to formalize their union. "We consider ourselves married in the eyes of God," Emma said finally. "We've made vows to each other." "That's not a legal marriage," Frank said triumphantly. "Which makes her my wife and his whore." This time it was Emma who spoke, her voice cold with fury. "Frank, I stopped being your wife the moment you put me on that auction block. Legal or not, that was the end of whatever bond existed between us. I choose Nathan. I choose this life. And no law or sheriff is going to change that. The sheriff found himself in an impossible position. Legally, Frank might have a claim. But morally, it was clear that Emma was where she wanted to be. There's something else to consider, the deputy said quietly. Mr. Diaz, you accepted money for your wife. That could be seen as abandonment under common law. Frank's face went white. That's not, I never intended. Intended what? Emma asked. To permanently get rid of a wife who couldn't give you children? Because that's exactly what you did. The sheriff was beginning to see a solution. Mr. Diaz, he said slowly, you have two choices. You can insist on your legal rights, in which case I'll have to arrest you for wife selling, which is illegal in this territory. Or you can accept that the sale constituted an abandonment of your marriage. Frank stared at him in shock. You can't arrest me. The sale was witnessed. Wife selling is never legal, Mr. Diaz. It's human trafficking. The only reason I haven't arrested you already is that Mrs. Edwards doesn't seem to have been harmed. Emma felt a surge of hope. Could Frank's greed be turned against him? What's it going to be, Frank? She asked. Prison or letting me go? Frank looked around wildly, seeing his plans crumbling. He had expected to reclaim his property and maybe extort money from Nathan. Instead, he faced arrest. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice shaking with rage. I'll find another way. Nathan started to rise, but Emma placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. No, Nathan, let me handle this. She walked over to stand in front of Frank, her chin raised and her eyes blazing with strength that 6 months ago she hadn't known she possessed. Frank, she said quietly, if you ever come near this mountain again, if you ever threaten Nathan or me, I will make sure that everyone in 3 counties knows exactly what kind of man you are. I'll tell them how you sold your wife because she couldn't bear children. And I'll make how they know that the only reason you wanted me back was spite and greed. Frank's face went from red to white to red again. Emma could see him calculating the social cost of her threats. You think you're so high and mighty now, he spat. But you're still just a barren woman living in sin with a crazy hermit. Emma smiled, and there was something in her expression that made Frank step backward. Frank, she said softly, I'd rather be a barren woman living in love with a good man than a fertile one trapped in misery with a cruel one. I pity any woman who ends up as your wife. The sheriff cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough. Mr. Diaz, you'll be leaving with us and you won't be coming back. Mrs. Edwards, you're free to make your own choices. Frank opened his mouth to protest, but the sheriff's stern look silenced him. As the 3 men prepared to leave, the sheriff turned back to Nathan and Emma. You might want to consider making your marriage legal, just to avoid future complications. Thank you, Sheriff, Emma said. We'll consider it. After the men left, Emma turned her attention to Nathan's wound. The bullet had passed through his shoulder without hitting bone, but it needed cleaning and bandaging. You were magnificent, he said quietly as she worked. The way you stood up to them, the way you handled Frank. I've never seen anything like it. Emma smiled as she tied off the bandage. I had a good teacher. You showed me what it means to be strong. I showed you how to survive alone. You taught yourself how to fight for the life you want. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Nathan brought up the sheriff's suggestion. What do you think? He asked. Would you like to be married in a church? Emma considered carefully. I think that I'm already married to you in every way that matters. But if a legal ceremony would protect us from future challenges, then yes. Then we'll go to Millfield in the spring. Make it official. Nathan, Emma said, taking his hand, there's something I want you to know. Today, when Frank was threatening us, I realized something. I would rather die than go back to that life. I would rather fight and lose than surrender my freedom. Nathan's grip tightened on her hand. You won't have to make that choice. I'll never let anyone take you away. I know, but what I'm trying to say is that you didn't just save me from Frank or from the auction block. You saved me from myself. You showed me that I was worth saving. Nathan pulled her closer. Emma, you saved yourself. You had the courage to change, to grow, to become the woman you were meant to be. I just provided a safe place for that to happen. Emma nestled against his side. Do you think we'll be happy here? Really happy? For the rest of our lives? I think, Nathan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, that happiness isn't a destination you reach. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice. And I can't think of anyone I'd rather build it with than you. The winter passed peacefully after Frank's failed attempt. The deep snows isolated them completely, but neither minded the solitude. Emma continued to grow stronger and more confident. Nathan taught her to shoot, reasoning that a woman living in the mountains needed to be able to defend herself. As spring approached, they made plans for their wedding ceremony. They discussed the trip to Millfield, planning it for early summer when the mountain passes would be clear. It was during one of these planning sessions that they received unexpected news. Lewis Harris appeared at their door on a bright May morning, his manner considerably more respectful than before. "Nathan, Mrs. Edwards," he said, touching his hat, "I have news I thought you should hear." "What kind of news?" Nathan asked. "About Frank Diaz. He's dead." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Despite everything, she had never wished him dead. "How?" she asked quietly. "Drinking," Lewis said bluntly. "Been on a bender since he came back from up here. Got into a fight in a saloon, pulled a knife on the wrong man. The other fellow shot him in self-defense." Emma sank into a chair, overwhelmed by mixed emotions. "There's more," Lewis continued. "The sheriff wants to see you both. Frank left some debts behind, and there's a question about his property. Since you were his wife, you might have a claim." Nathan moved to stand behind Emma's chair. "Emma doesn't want anything that belonged to Frank." "Maybe not," Lewis said, "but the law says she's entitled to it. And there's something else. Frank had been telling people he was going to get his wife back, that he had a plan to make Nathan pay. The sheriff thinks you should know that some folks took him seriously." Emma looked up at Nathan, seeing her own concern reflected in his eyes. "What kind of plan?" Nathan asked. "Nobody knows for sure. Frank was drunk most of the time. But he mentioned something about proving that your marriage wasn't legal, about having you arrested for adultery." Emma felt a chill. Even dead, Frank was still trying to destroy her happiness. "The sheriff wants to clear all this up," Lewis continued. "Make sure there's no legal cloud hanging over your heads. He suggested that you come to town and settle Frank's estate officially, maybe get married by the preacher while you're there." They made the trip to Millfield a week later. The town looked smaller and shabbier than Emma remembered, and she marveled at how much her perspective had changed. Sheriff Morrison greeted them with genuine warmth, a marked change from his attitude during Frank's confrontation. He explained that Frank's estate consisted mainly of debts and a small, run-down farm. "When as his widow, you are entitled to whatever's left after the debts were paid," the sheriff told Emma. "But there won't be much." "I don't want anything," Emma said firmly. "Let his creditors have whatever they can get." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "That's generous of you. There is one other matter, though. Frank had been spreading stories about your situation. The best way to put those stories to rest would be to make your marriage official." And so, on a warm June afternoon, Emma Martinez became Emma Edwards, in the eyes of the law, as well as in her heart. The ceremony was simple, performed by a kind-faced preacher with only the sheriff and his wife as witnesses. But as Emma spoke her vows to Nathan, promising to love and honor him for the rest of her days, she felt a completeness she had never known was possible. Nathan's vows were equally heartfelt, his deep voice steady as he promised to protect and cherish her, to stand by her side through whatever challenges life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan's kiss was gentle and reverent. After the ceremony, they celebrated with a simple meal, and Emma was surprised by how many people stopped by to offer congratulations. The story of the mountain man who had paid $100 to save a woman from an unwanted marriage had spread throughout the territory. As they prepared to leave town the next morning, Emma reflected on how different this departure felt. Then she had been a frightened woman with no choices. Now she was a married woman returning to a home she had helped build. The trip back up the mountain was leisurely and pleasant. Emma found herself looking forward to returning to their cabin, to the garden that would need tending, and the life that was truly theirs now. As they crested the final ridge, Emma gasped at the sight that greeted them. Their cabin sat peacefully, but something was different. Smoke rose from the chimney, and there were horses in their corral that didn't belong to them. Nathan's hand moved instinctively to his rifle. "Stay in the wagon." But as they drew closer, a familiar figure emerged from the cabin, and Nathan relaxed. It was Jack Kelly, a fellow veteran who had occasionally traded with Nathan. Behind him came a woman Emma didn't recognize, young and obviously pregnant, with two small children clinging to her skirts. "Nathan," Jack called out. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion. We had some trouble down in the valley and needed a safe place to rest." Nathan helped Emma down from the wagon. Jack looked older and more worn than Emma remembered from Nathan's descriptions, and there was something haunted in his eyes. "What kind of trouble?" Nathan asked. "The kind that comes with a badge and a grudge," Jack said grimly. "Seems my wife's first husband has decided he wants her back, along with the children. Claims I kidnapped them." Emma felt a chill of recognition. The situation was eerily similar to what they had faced with Frank. "This is Ruth," Jack said, drawing his wife forward. "Ruth, this is Nathan Edwards and his wife Emma." Ruth Garcia was clearly exhausted and frightened, but she managed a wan smile. "I'm sorry to impose on you. Jack said you might understand our situation." Emma looked at this young woman, so obviously pregnant and vulnerable, and saw herself as she had been a year ago. "Of course we understand. Come inside and let's get you something to eat." Over the next few hours, the story came out. Ruth had been married to a brutal man who had beaten her regularly and threatened to kill her children. She had fled with Jack's help, and they had married in a small town 200 miles away. But her first husband had tracked them down and convinced a corrupt sheriff that Jack was a kidnapper. "We've been running for weeks," Ruth said, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "Jack thought maybe up here, in the mountains, we could find some peace." Emma and Nathan exchanged glances, both thinking of their own recent troubles. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need to," Nathan said. "But you should know that we've had our own troubles with men who think they own their wives." The next few days passed peacefully as Jack and Ruth rested and recovered. Emma enjoyed having another woman to talk to, and Nathan seemed to appreciate Jack's company. The children were delightful additions to the household, but their peace was not destined to last. On the fourth day, they were awakened before dawn by the sound of many horses approaching the cabin. Nathan was up and armed in seconds, with Jack close behind him. "How many?" Jack whispered as they peered out the windows. 8, maybe 10, Nathan replied grimly. "Too many to fight if they're hostile." Emma gathered Ruth and the children in the bedroom while the men prepared to face whatever was coming. Through the window, she could see armed men surrounding the cabin. A voice called out from the darkness. "Jack Kelly, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up." Jack cursed under his breath. "That's Sheriff Hawkins. Ruth's first husband must have convinced him to come after us himself." "Jack Kelly," the voice called again, "you're under arrest for kidnapping and theft. Send out Ruth Garcia and her children, and we might let you live." Ruth whimpered and clutched her children closer. Emma felt a familiar surge of anger at the injustice of it all. "What do we do?" Ruth whispered. Emma looked at this frightened young woman and her innocent children, and she made a decision that surprised even herself. "We fight," she said quietly, "not with guns, but with truth. If these men want to take you back to an abuser, they will have to explain themselves to witnesses." Nathan appeared in the doorway. "Emma, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that sunlight is the best disinfectant," Emma replied. "Jack, how many of those men out there do you think know the real story of why Ruth left her first husband?" Jack considered the question. "Probably none of them. Hawkins is corrupt, but most of his men are just following orders." Emma nodded. "Then let's make sure they know what they're really here to do." Before anyone could stop her, Emma walked to the front door and opened it wide. She stepped out onto the porch, her hands visible and empty, her chin raised defiantly. "Sheriff Hawkins," she called out clearly, "I'm Emma Edwards. This is my home, and Jack Kelly and his family are my guests." A man on horseback rode closer. "Mrs. Edwards, this doesn't concern you. We're here for a kidnapper and the woman and children he stole." "Stole from whom?" Emma asked loudly, making sure all the men could hear her. "From a man who beat his pregnant wife? From a man who threatened to kill his own children?" A murmur ran through the group of riders. Clearly, this was not the story they had been told. "That's not—" "We were told," Sheriff Hawkins stammered. "You were told lies by a man who thinks he owns his wife and children like livestock," Emma continued. The same kind of lies my first husband told when he tried to reclaim me after selling me at auction. The murmur grew louder. Emma could see doubt and confusion on several faces. Ruth Garcia Kelly is here by choice, Emma said firmly. She fled an abusive marriage to save her life and the lives of her children. Jack Kelly married her legally and honorably. If you take her back to her first husband, you're condemning her and her unborn child to death. One of the younger deputies spoke up. Sheriff, if what she's saying is true, it's not true, I stay, Hawkins snapped. These people are criminals and liars. That was when Ruth herself appeared in the doorway, her children beside her, and her pregnancy obvious even in the dim light. It is true, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. Every word of it. My first husband beat me so badly I lost 2 babies. He said he'd kill me and the children if I ever tried to leave. Jack saved our lives. The doubt on the deputies' faces was growing more obvious. These were decent men, and the idea of returning a pregnant woman to an abuser clearly troubled them. Sheriff Hawkins, seeing his authority slipping away, decided to try intimidation. I don't care what sob story you have cooked up. I have a warrant for Jack Kelly's arrest. On whose authority? Nathan asked, stepping out to stand beside Emma. On the authority of Judge Morrison in Millfield, Hawkins replied. Emma felt a surge of hope. Judge Morrison? Sheriff Morrison's brother? Hawkins nodded, clearly wondering where she was going with this. Then you won't mind if we send someone to Millfield to confirm that warrant, Emma said sweetly. I'm sure Judge Morrison will be very interested to hear about the circumstances surrounding it. The color drained from Hawkins' face. Clearly, the warrant was not as legitimate as he had claimed. We don't need to bother the judge, he said quickly. Oh, but I insist, Emma replied. In fact, I think we should all go to Millfield together. Let Judge Morrison hear both sides of this story and decide what justice really looks like. One of the deputies, an older man with sergeant's stripes, rode forward. Sheriff, maybe we should listen to what these folks have to say. This doesn't feel right. Hawkins glared at him. Are you questioning my authority, Sergeant? I'm questioning the wisdom of dragging a pregnant woman back to a man who beats her, the sergeant replied firmly. That's not law enforcement, Sheriff. That's just cruelty. Emma saw her opening and pressed her advantage. Sergeant, would you be willing to escort us all to Millfield? Let Judge Morrison sort this out properly? The sergeant looked around at his men, seeing the same doubt and discomfort on their faces that he felt himself. I think that's a fine idea, ma'am. Sheriff Hawkins realized that he was losing control of the situation. His corrupt deal with Ruth's first husband was falling apart, and his own men were turning against him. Fine, he said through gritted teeth, we'll all go to Millfield. But when Judge Morrison confirms my warrant, I want all of you to remember that you obstructed justice. Emma smiled. Sheriff, I'm looking forward to that conversation with Judge Morrison. I'm sure he'll be very interested in how you came by that warrant. The journey to Millfield was tense but uneventful. Ruth rode in Nathan and Emma's wagon while Jack rode under guard with the deputies. Sheriff Hawkins kept to himself, clearly brooding over how his simple arrest had turned into a complex legal challenge. Emma used the time to learn more about Ruth's story and to prepare their case. The more she heard about Ruth's first husband, Louis Harris, who had systematically abused and terrorized his family, the more determined she became to see justice done. He started hitting me almost as soon as we were married, Ruth confided as they traveled. At first it was just slaps when I did something wrong, but it got worse after the children were born. Then one day he went too far. He hit me so hard I lost consciousness, and when I woke up, I was bleeding. The baby I was carrying, Ruth's voice broke. Emma reached over and squeezed her hand. You don't have to tell me if it's too painful. No, I need to say it. I lost that baby because of what he did to me. And when I was lying there bleeding, he told me it was my fault for being weak. That's when I knew I had to leave or die. And Jack helped you? Jack saved us. He got us away in the middle of the night, took us to a preacher who married us properly. We've been happy, Emma. For the first time in years, I've been happy. My children aren't afraid anymore, and this baby will be born into love, not fear. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Ruth's story was different from her own, but the underlying theme was the same. Women treated as property, their value measured only by their ability to serve men's needs. We won't let them take you back, Emma said firmly. I promise you that. When they reached Millfield, they were met by Sheriff Morrison, who had heard about the commotion from a rider who had preceded them. His expression was grim as he surveyed the unusual procession. Sheriff Hawkins, he said coldly, I understand you have some questions about a warrant issued by my brother. Hawkins dismounted and pulled a folded paper from his coat. Judge Morrison issued this warrant for the arrest of Jack Kelly on charges of kidnapping and theft. Sheriff Morrison examined the document carefully, his frown deepening as he read. This warrant is dated yesterday, but it's signed with my brother's old seal, the one he stopped using 6 months ago. Emma felt a surge of satisfaction as she saw the trap closing around Hawkins. Are you suggesting the warrant is forged? Hawkins demanded. I'm not suggesting anything, Sheriff Morrison replied. I'm stating a fact. This warrant is either forged or backdated. Either way, it's not legal. The sergeant who had questioned Hawkins earlier stepped forward. Sheriff Morrison, we'd like to request an official investigation into this matter. Sheriff Morrison nodded approvingly. Sergeant, I think that's an excellent idea. In the meantime, I suggest we all go see Judge Morrison and get this sorted out properly. Judge Morrison turned out to be an older, more distinguished version of his brother, with the same keen intelligence and commitment to justice. He listened carefully as both sides presented their cases, asking pointed questions and taking detailed notes. When Sheriff Hawkins presented his warrant, Judge Morrison examined it with a magnifying glass and shook his head grimly. This is indeed a forgery, he announced. Not only is the seal outdated, but the signature is not mine. Sheriff Hawkins, how did you come by this document? Hawkins squirmed in his chair. It was given to me by Lewis Harris, Ruth's legal husband. He said you had issued it after he filed a complaint. I have no record of any complaint filed by Lewis Harris, Judge Morrison said. In fact, I have no record of any legal proceeding involving Jack Kelly or Ruth Garcia Kelly. Emma leaned forward. Your Honor, I believe Sheriff Hawkins was paid to arrest Jack Kelly and return Ruth to her abusive first husband. This was never about law enforcement. It was about one man's desire to control and abuse his former wife. Judge Morrison's expression darkened. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Edwards. It's a serious situation, Your Honor. Ruth fled an abusive marriage to save her life and the lives of her children. Jack Kelly married her legally and has been protecting her from her abuser. Sheriff Hawkins was willing to use forged documents to return her to a man who has already caused her to lose one child through violence. The judge turned to Ruth, who was sitting with her children close beside her. Mrs. Kelly, is this true? Was your first marriage abusive? Ruth nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Your Honor. Lewis beat me regularly. He caused me to lose a baby through his violence. I was afraid he would kill me or my children if I stayed. And your marriage to Jack Kelly? Legal and loving, Your Honor. Jack has never raised a hand to me or my children. We've been happy together. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces before him. When he spoke, his voice was firm and decisive. Sheriff Hawkins, you are under arrest for attempting to serve a forged warrant and for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Sergeant, please place him in custody. Hawkins jumped to his feet. You can't do this. I was acting in good faith. You were acting on a forged document in service of a corrupt scheme, Judge Morrison replied coldly. That's not good faith, Sheriff. That's criminal negligence at best, active corruption at worst. As Hawkins was led away in handcuffs, Judge Morrison turned to Jack and Ruth. Mr. and Mrs. Kelly, your marriage is legal and valid. You are free to go wherever you choose to make your home. Ruth burst into tears of relief, and Jack pulled her close, his own eyes wet with emotion. Oh, thank you, Your Honor, Jack said. Thank you for listening to the truth. Judge Morrison smiled. Thank you for having the courage to tell it. And Mrs. Edwards, he added, turning to Emma, thank you for standing up for justice. Your intervention likely saved this family from a terrible fate. Emma felt a warm glow of satisfaction. For the first time in her life, she had used her voice and her strength to protect someone else, to fight for what was right rather than simply enduring what was wrong. As they prepared to leave Millfield, Ruth pulled Emma aside. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You saved us. We saved each other, Emma replied. That's what women do. when we stand together instead of letting men divide us. Ruth nodded, understanding the deeper truth in Emma's words. Will we see you again? I hope so. You're always welcome on our mountain. And when that baby comes, if you need help with the birth, send word. I know something about bringing children safely into the world. Ruth hugged her tightly. I will. And Emma, you may not have children of your own, but you're going to be a wonderful mother to all the children whose lives you touch. Emma felt her heart swell with an emotion she couldn't name. For years, she had defined herself by what she couldn't do, by what she couldn't give. Now she was beginning to understand that her worth lay not in her ability to bear children, but in her capacity to nurture, protect, and heal. The journey back to their mountain was peaceful and contemplative. Emma and Nathan talked quietly about what had happened, about the strange way their lives seemed to intersect with others who needed help and sanctuary. Do you think we'll see more people like Jack and Ruth? Emma asked as they climbed the familiar mountain paths. Probably, Nathan replied. Word spreads about places where people can find safety and justice. We may find ourselves becoming a refuge for others who need help. Emma considered this possibility. Would that bother you, having your solitude interrupted by other people's troubles? Nathan was quiet for a moment, thinking. A year ago, I would have said yes. I came up here to be alone, to escape from the complexities of human relationships. But you've taught me that isolation isn't the same as peace. Sometimes the most meaningful life is one spent helping others find their own peace. Emma smiled. So you wouldn't mind if our mountain became known as a place where people in trouble could find help? I think, Nathan said slowly, that it might be exactly what this mountain was meant to be. A place of healing and sanctuary, watched over by people who understand what it means to be lost and found again. As they crested the final ridge and saw their cabin nestled in its peaceful valley, Emma felt a deep sense of coming home. But it was more than just returning to a place she loved. It was the recognition that she had found her purpose, her calling in life. She was no longer Emma Martinez, the barren wife who had been sold at auction. She was Emma Edwards, healer and protector, a woman who had found her strength and was ready to use it to help others find theirs. The seasons turned, and their mountain sanctuary grew in reputation and purpose. Word spread quietly through the territory about the place where people in trouble could find help, where women fleeing abuse could find safety, where children could be born into love instead of fear. Emma's skills as a healer and midwife became legendary. She delivered babies, treated injuries, and provided herbal remedies for everything from fever to heartbreak. Her herb garden expanded into a small pharmacy of natural medicines, and she began training other women in the healing arts. Nathan proved to be an ideal partner in their mission of mercy. His military skills made their mountain stronghold secure, while his gentle nature made it welcoming. He built additional cabins for families who needed longer-term sanctuary and established a network of trusted allies who could provide safe passage for those fleeing danger. Their marriage deepened with each challenge they faced together. They had learned to fight as a Mawamkun team, to support each other's strengths and compensate for each other's weaknesses. The question of children had long since ceased to matter. They had found their own way of creating and nurturing life. It was during their third winter together that Emma received news that would test everything they had built. A letter arrived with a trader, brought from a lawyer in the territorial capital, with news about Frank's estate. It seems Frank had more property than anyone knew, Emma told Nathan as she read the letter. There's a mine claim that's proven valuable, and some investments that have paid off. As his widow, I'm entitled to a significant inheritance. Nathan looked up from the harness he was mending. How significant? Enough to buy a ranch or build a real town, or... Emma paused, an idea forming in her mind. Or establish a proper sanctuary, a place with multiple buildings, a real clinic, maybe even a school. Nathan set down his work and gave her his full attention. What are you thinking? Emma's eyes were bright with excitement. I'm thinking that maybe Frank's cruelty can be turned into something good. Maybe the money he left behind can be used to help other women escape the kind of life he tried to force on me. Nathan smiled. I think that's exactly what should happen to that money. Frank would probably roll over in his grave, which makes it even more appealing. They spent the rest of the winter planning their expanded sanctuary. Emma designed a clinic where she could treat patients and train other healers. Nathan drew up plans for a series of cabins that could house families in need, along with workshops where people could learn useful trades. When spring came, they traveled to the territorial capital to claim Emma's inheritance and begin the legal process of establishing their sanctuary as an official institution. The lawyers were amazed by their plans, and several prominent citizens offered to support their work with additional donations. It's unusual, one lawyer admitted, for someone to inherit wealth and immediately plan to give it away to help strangers. Emma smiled. I've learned that the best way to heal from pain is to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. This money came from a man who caused me great suffering. Using it to help other women escape suffering seems like perfect justice. The construction of their expanded sanctuary took 2 years. Emma supervised the building of the clinic and the training facilities, while Nathan oversaw the construction of the residential buildings and defensive fortifications. They hired trusted workers and gradually assembled a staff of people who shared their vision of a place where the vulnerable could find safety and healing. Ruth and Jack Kelly were among their first permanent residents, helping to run the sanctuary while raising their growing family. Ruth proved to have a natural talent for counseling women who had experienced abuse, while Jack became Nathan's lieutenant in providing security and training. Emma's reputation as a healer spread far beyond their mountain territory. She began receiving requests for her services from as far away as California and Texas. Rather than travel herself, she established a training program for healers and midwives, sending skilled practitioners to places where they were needed most. The sanctuary also became a center for legal advocacy. Emma worked with sympathetic lawyers to challenge laws that treated women as property and to establish legal precedents that protected women's rights to leave abusive marriages. You've become quite the reformer, Nathan observed one evening as Emma worked on a letter to a judge about a case involving a woman whose husband was trying to have her committed to an asylum for refusing to bear more children. Emma looked up from her writing. I never intended to become a reformer. I just wanted to help people who were in situations like mine. Sometimes that's how the best reforms start, Nathan replied, with someone who's experienced injustice personally and refuses to let others suffer the same fate. Emma set down her pen and moved to sit beside Nathan on the bench he had built outside their cabin. From here, they could see the entire sanctuary spread out below them, the clinic where women learned to heal, the workshops where they learned trades, the cabins where families found safety and hope. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Giving up your peaceful solitude for all this chaos and responsibility? Nathan pulled her close, his arm warm and strong around her shoulders. Emma, I thought I wanted solitude because I was afraid of being hurt again, afraid of caring too much about people who might be taken away from me. But what I really wanted was purpose, a reason to get up every morning that was bigger than just surviving. Emma leaned against his side, feeling the solid comfort of his presence. We've built something good here, haven't we? We've built something extraordinary, a place where people can heal, where children can grow up safe, where women can learn that they have value beyond what men think of them. As the sun set behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a woman defined by what she couldn't do, sold at auction like livestock because she couldn't bear children. Now she was a woman defined by what she could do, heal the sick, deliver babies, provide sanctuary for the vulnerable, train other women to be healers and advocates. She had found a different kind of fertility, a way of nurturing life that had nothing to do with her own womb and everything to do with her heart and hands. Nathan, she said softly, I want you to know that I'm grateful for every day of this life we've built together. Even the hard days, even the days when we face danger or heartbreak. This is the life was meant to live. Nathan's kiss was gentle and full of love. This is the life we were both meant to live, together. As they sat in the gathering darkness, watching the lights come on in the cabins below, Emma thought about all the women and children who had found safety within these walls, all the lives that had been changed and healed. She thought about the babies she had delivered, the women she had trained, the legal victories they had won. She had been auctioned off for being barren, but she had found a way to be fruitful beyond anything she had ever imagined. She had created not just a sanctuary, but a movement, a network of people committed to protecting the vulnerable and fighting injustice. Years passed, and the sanctuary grew into a small town. Emma's clinic became a teaching hospital where women from across the territory came to learn healing arts. Nathan's workshops produced skilled craftspeople who went on to establish their own businesses in communities throughout the region. Emma herself became a figure of national prominence, invited to speak at women's rights conventions, and consulted by lawmakers drafting legislation to protect women and children. But she never forgot where she came from or why she did the work she did. On the 10th anniversary of the day Nathan had bid on her at auction, Emma stood once again before a crowd of people. But this time she was not being sold. She was being honored for her work in establishing sanctuaries for abused women throughout the Western Territories. 10 years ago, she told the assembled crowd, I was told that I was worthless because I couldn't bear children. I was sold at auction like livestock because my husband decided I had no value. Today I stand before you as proof that a woman's worth is not determined by her ability to reproduce or her willingness to submit to male authority. The applause was thunderous, but Emma's eyes were fixed on Nathan, who stood at the back of the hall with tears of pride shining in his eyes. I was saved not by a man who wanted to own me, she continued, but by a man who wanted to free me. Nathan Edwards didn't bid on me because he needed a wife or wanted children. He bid on me because he believed that no human being should be treated as property. Emma paused, thinking about all the women and children who had passed through their sanctuary, all the lives that had been changed and saved. We've learned that healing comes not from forgetting our pain, but from transforming it into purpose. Every woman who finds safety in our sanctuaries, every child who grows up free from fear, every law that's changed to protect the vulnerable, these are the true children of our union. These are the legacy we leave behind. After the ceremony, Emma and Nathan walked together through the town that had grown up around their original mountain cabin. Children played in the streets, women worked in shops and clinics, families lived in safety and dignity. Do you think we've done enough? Emma asked as they paused outside the original cabin, now preserved as a historical site and symbol of their work. Nathan smiled, his hair now silver but his eyes still warm with love for her. I think we've done what we were meant to do. We've shown that love and justice are more powerful than cruelty and greed. We've proven that broken people can heal and help others heal. Emma nodded, feeling a deep sense of completion. I was auctioned off for being barren, but we've been fruitful in ways I never could have imagined. We've created life and hope and healing. We've built something that will last long after we're gone. As the sun set behind the familiar mountain peaks, Emma reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this place of peace and purpose. She had been sold like livestock, but she had found her humanity. She had been called barren, but she had given birth to a movement. She had been broken, but she had learned to heal. The mountain man who had bid highest for her had said he didn't need more heirs. He had been right, in ways he couldn't have known at the time. They didn't need biological children to create a lasting legacy. They had found a different kind of parenthood, a different way of nurturing life and ensuring that their values would survive them. Emma took Nathan's hand as they walked back toward their home, surrounded by the community they had built together. She was no longer the frightened woman who had stood on that auction block, wondering what kind of man would buy a barren wife. She was a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and her voice. She was exactly who she was meant to be. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the sounds of a community at peace. Children's laughter, women's voices raising conversation, the gentle sounds of people living lives of dignity and hope. Emma closed her eyes and listened to the symphony of the life she and Nathan had created together, and she knew that their love story would continue long after they were gone. In every woman who found safety, every child who grew up free, every law that protected the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. They had been auctioned off and bought, but they had found a love that could not be sold or purchased. They had been called barren, but they had created abundance. They had been broken, but they had learned to heal not just themselves, but countless others. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not just surviving their own pain, but transforming it into a source of healing for others. They had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to them and turned it into the best thing they had ever done. As they reached their front door, Emma paused one last time to look out over the sanctuary they had built together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people in need of help, new opportunities to make a difference in the world. But tonight she was content to be exactly where she was, with the man who had seen her worth when no one else could, in the place they had built with love and determination and an unshakable belief that every person deserved dignity, safety, and the chance to heal. She was Emma Edwards, and she was home.